येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथान्वितां तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। तप्त काञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी नमामि हरिं। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। जयतां सुरतोपङ्गो मम मन्दमतेर्गति मत्सर्वस्य पदाम्भोजौ राधा मदनमोहनौ। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. Once again, seek the blessings of all the Vaishnavas present here, my parents, my grandparents, and then specifically take the blessings of Radha Madan Mohan ji, both here in Silicon Valley and in Chennai. So let's begin with reciting this verse. So today we are going to see the verse 326.3, Canto 3, Chapter 26, text number 3. So let's start. अनादिर आत्मपुरुषो निर्गुणः प्रकृते परः प्रत्यग्धाम स्वयं ज्योतिर्विश्वं येन समन्वितम्। अनादिर आत्मपुरुषो निर्गुणः प्रकृते परः प्रत्यग्धाम स्वयं ज्योतिर्विश्वं येन संवितम्। अनादिर आत्मपुरुषो निर्गुणः प्रकृते परः प्रत्यग्धाम स्वयं ज्योतिर्विश्वं येन समन्वितम्. Is someone going to read the synonyms, translation, and purport? Does someone want to read?
Anadi, without a beginning. Atma, the supreme soul. Shaha, the personality of Godhead. Nirgunaha, transcendental to the material modes of nature. Prakriti Paraha, beyond this material world. Pratyak Dhama, perceivable everywhere. Swayam Jyotihi, self-effulgent. Vishwam, the entire creation. Yena, by whom? Samanvitam is maintained. Translation and purport by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Soul. It has no beginning. He is transcendental to the material modes of nature, beyond the existence of this material world. He is perceivable everywhere because he is self-effulgent. His self-effulgent luster, the entire creation is maintained. Anybody can read the purport?
Hare Krishna. Purport by Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Sri Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of the Godhead is described as being without beginning. He is Purusa, the Supreme Spirit. Purusa means person. When we think of a person in our present experience, a person has a beginning. This means that he has taken a birth and that there is a history from the beginning of his life. But the Lord is particularly mentioned here as Anadi, beginningless. If we examine all persons, we will find that everyone has a beginning. But when we approach a person who has no beginning, he is Supreme Personal. That is the definition given in the Brahma Samhita. Isvara Parama Krishna, the Supreme Personality of the Godhead, is Krishna, the Supreme Controller. He is without beginning and He is beginning of everyone. This definition is found in all Vedic literatures. The Lord is described as the soul or spirit. What is the definition of spirit? Spirit is perceivable everywhere. Brahmanas means great. His greatness is perceived everywhere. And what is that greatness? Consciousness. We have a personal experience of consciousness, for it is spread all over the body. In every hair follicle of our body, we can feel consciousness. This is individual consciousness. Similarly, there is super consciousness. The example can be given of a small light and the sunlight. The sunlight is perceived everywhere, even within the room or in the sky, but the small light is experienced within the specific limit. Similarly, our consciousness is received within the limit of our particular body, but the super consciousness or the existence of God is perceived everywhere. He is present everywhere by his energy. It is stated in Vishnu Purana that whatever we find anywhere and everywhere is the distribution of the energy of the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita also it is confirmed that the Lord is all pervading and exists everywhere by his two kinds of energy, one spiritual and other material. Both the spiritual and material energies are spread everywhere, and that is the proof of the existence of the Supreme Personality of the Godhead. The existence of consciousness everywhere is not temporary. It is without beginning. And because it is without beginning, it is also without end. The theory that consciousness develops at a certain stage of material combination is not accepted herein. For the consciousness which exists everywhere, it is said to be without beginning. The materialistic or atheist theory stating that there is no soul, that there is no God, and the consciousness is the result of a combination of a matter is not acceptable. Matter is not beginningless, and it has a beginning. As this material body has a beginning, the universal body does also. And as our material body has a begun on the basis of our soul, the entire gigantic universal body has begun on the basis of the Supreme Soul. The Vedanta Sutra says, Janmadi Asya, this entire material exhibition, its creation, its growth, its maintenance, and its dissolution is an emanation from the Supreme Person. In Bhagavad Gita also, the Lord says, I am the beginning, the source of birth of everything. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described here. He is not a temporary person, nor does he have a beginning. He is without a cause, and he is the cause of all causes. Para means transcendental, beyond the creative energy. The Lord is the creator of the creative energy. We can see that there is a creative energy in the material world, but he is not under this energy. He is Prakriti Paraha, beyond this energy. He is not subjected to the threefold miseries created by material energy because he is beyond it. The modes of material nature do not touch him. It is explained here, Swayam Jyoti, he is light himself. We have experience in the material world of one light being a reflection of another, just as moonlight is a reflection of the sunlight. Sunlight is also the reflection of a Brahma Jyoti. Similarly, Brahma Jyoti, the spiritual effulgence, is a reflection of the body of the Supreme Lord. This is confirmed in Brahma Samhita. Yasya Prabhavata. The Brahma Jyoti or the Brahman effulgence is due to his bodily luster. Therefore, it is said here, Swayam Jyoti, he himself is light. His light is distributed in different ways, as the Brahma Jyoti, as sunlight, and as moonlight. Bhagavad Gita confirms that in the spiritual world there is no need of sunlight, moonlight, or electricity. The Upanishad also confirms this because the bodily of, luster of the Supreme Personality of the Godhead is sufficient to illuminate the spiritual world. There is no need of sunlight or moonlight or any other light or electricity. The self-illumination also contradicts the theory that the spiritual soul or spiritual consciousness develops at a certain point in material combination. The term Swayam Jyoti indicates that there is no tinge of anything material or any material reaction. It is confirmed here that the concept of the Lord's all pervasiveness is due to his illumination everywhere. We have experienced that the sun is situated in one place, but the sunlight is diffused all around the millions and millions of miles. That is our practical experience. Similarly, although the Supreme Light is situated in his personal abode, Vaikuntha or Vindavana, his light is diffused not only in the spiritual world, but beyond that. In the material world also, the light is reflected by the sun globe, and the sunlight is reflected by the moon globe. Thus, although he is situated in his own abode, his light is distributed all over the spiritual and material world. The Brahma Samhita 5.37 confirms this. Goloka eva nivasyati akhilatma utaha. He is living in Goloka, but still he is present all over the creation. He is the super soul of everything, the supreme personality of Godhead, and he has innumerable transcendental qualities. It is also concluded that although he is undoubtedly a person, he is not a Purusa or this material world. Mayavadi philosophers cannot understand that beyond this material world there can be a person. Therefore, they are impersonalist. But it is explained very nicely here that a personality of Godhead is beyond material existence. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai, thank you, Prabhu. Actually, can I share screen? Is that okay?
Sure, you can. Sure.
Yes, just 1 second. So, okay. Can you see now, Prabhu? Can you see what I'm sharing?
Yeah, it's
Yes,
energy
Prabhu.
consciousness
Okay.
ECC.
Okay. So, thank you, Prabhu. So, I'm sorry for the date. It should be April. Sorry for that. But anyway, let's start. So, it's a big purport. It's a big verse. There's a lot of conceptions in this purport that Prabhupada explains. I think personally it's a very key verse. And so this chapter is the fundamental analysis of material nature. And already we have established about what is the importance of knowledge. Last week, Sadashiv Prabhu spoke about the importance of knowledge. So now we are talking about the Supreme Lord and then perception and his energies. So I want to start with two points which Prabhu made last week initially. And I think those are the two things I took home very specifically. And I want to start with that. So one thing Prabhu said was we have to become the observer of consciousness. And if you and Prabhus and Matajis, if you've noticed, this purport is a lot about consciousness. So we are going to be talking a lot about, hopefully, we're going to be talking a lot about consciousness. Today, I'm going to try and let's try to focus on consciousness and understand what it is and how beautiful it is and how special it is to us. And even if you don't think it's special, it actually is very special. because it's reflected in the way we live in the world. It's reflected in the way we interact with others. It's reflected in our legal system. It's reflected in compassion, and it's reflected in almost basically anything that you would consider specifically human. At least let's start from a human perspective. Let's not from a very basic, I'm talking about a very basic level of analysis. So consciousness is really important from that perspective. And Prabhu made a very interesting point about being the observer of consciousness. And so when you say being the observer of consciousness, then naturally the question becomes, so is consciousness a phenomenon? And is there an observer? And the answer is yes. So consciousness is a phenomenon that we all experience, and we are inextricably tied up to consciousness. And the Atma as such, which is the soul as such, in and of itself, is the observer of consciousness. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. And observing consciousness is probably one of the best things we can do. And it's the starting point of transitioning from a matter-based view, a realist, or let's say a physicalist, materialistic view of life, to something that's more spiritual. And then coming to something like Vedantic or spiritual panpsychism, in the sense of seeing that consciousness is the basis of everything else, even things that we don't consider as conscious. There's consciousness behind them. It's kind of behind the screens, if you will. So that's the first point, and I think this idea is very relevant and very germane to what we want to talk about today, and in relation to the Vaishnava community and the theistic community as a whole, because there's a lot of discussion today and a lot of pushback from the scientific community and the materialistic community, where specifically science, let me be very specific, specifically from the scientific community, specifically from neuroscientists, and as you would have seen Prabhupada elucidate these points about, he's basically, so in this verse it's very clear what Prabhupada is fighting, and he's fighting a very materialistic view of consciousness, and ergo a materialistic view of the entire system of life, values of life, and so on and so on. So now one of the recent trends is there is from a lot of the neuroscientific, specifically neuroscience community, there is a lot of interest in denying the idea of the self itself. It is considered a little bit of hot potato still, and that's good at the very minimum. But even then, there are people who are very explicit about uh, denying the idea of the self, denying the idea of free will. Consciousness is an epiphenomenon, which is basically a phenomenon that just arises out of some underlying reasons, and there's no specific meaning to it. So we're going to explore some of these ideas to actually kind of flesh out exactly what Prabhupada is fighting, and also put in some context on what is exactly the thing that we as a Vaishnava community are fighting against in terms of from a Vedantic perspective on how we need to present consciousness to people who are very dismissive and who take all these ideas as the non-existence of a self, and so on, and non-existence of free will, and so on. So that's why it's very important to be an observer of consciousness, because it's being dismissed as illusionism, and that's not something that's good for the world in any way at all. So we should actually strengthen our thinking process and uh, our approach to consciousness as such, and we can base it on a very comprehensive system of a very comprehensive theological system that's been laid out in the Bhagavad Gita, throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, and some of the work of other Goswamis, Jiva Goswami in particular. That's something we're going to try and touch on today. Prabhu also mentioned about the multiverse theory, and he compared it with the Vedantic conclusion, and he specifically quoted this verse, Yakaranarnava Jale Bhajatisma Yoga. This is from Brahma Samhita, as we all know. It's talking about Mahavishnu lying on the causal ocean, and then there's so many different universes that come out of him. And the multiverse theory is based on, it's pretty interesting to note, and it's being pushed for a specific reason, and that reason is it's kind of attempting to shadow the Darwinian method. So the Darwinian theory is nature itself is capable of producing life, producing consciousness, and basically through different species. And he wrote this original Origin of Species paper where he said there's one, it starts from like a single cell organism. There's a one cell organism which then mutates, and then there's a natural selection where so he has two specific topics. One is mutation, two specific principles. One is mutation, and the other one is natural selection, where these two topics, actually, these two principles, they kind of establish the framework of how evolution is viewed from a biological point of view, then also from a psychological point of view. So in mutation and natural selection, mutation is saying small changes in the code that produces the proteins and the basic DNA and stuff, that changes a little bit, and then you get a new organism. Like let's say something like a like a bat turns into an elephant or whatever. I mean, I'm just, there's a little bit of hyperbole in that, but they try to present that kind of an idea. So now the attempt from the physicist side of the world is, okay, so we're going to take Darwinian philosophy in evolution, and now we are going to kind of transpose it to something like this history of the universe, because as of now, there is some consensus on saying, okay, now everything is ex nihilo, in the sense it started ex nihilo, saying we started from nothing. Basically, there was nothing that existed, and then the laws of physics came about, and then that's how we ended up here. So there are possibly multiple different universes, and it just happened that out of random chance, one of those universes had all the parameters for life, and not just like for life, for consciousness, in terms of everything else that allows like the sustenance and flourishing of life. Everything comes through that. So they're trying to, kind of transpose the Darwinian methods into something like a universal evolution kind of a concept, and that's absolutely refuted by our Vedantic conclusion, because we know each universe, there is an absolute cause, the supreme cause. And we saw the description, it's a Purusha, it's a Para Purusha, there's a Para and transcendental energy. So now, it's just these two starting points. I thought it's a good place for me to start. So now we go into, so last week was talking about the knots of spirit and matter that are tied by the individual soul due to his fruitive actions. And those, so this is the verse which I wanted to quote, the Vidyate Hridaya Granthi verse. Let me see if I have that. Yes. So this is the verse. This is from one. This is 1-21. It says, "Vidyate hridaya grantis, chidyante sarva samshaya, shriyante chasya karmani, drishta evatmanishware." So the knot in the heart is pierced, and all the misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as the master. So now, because of this chain of fruitive action, we have made these kind of apparently inextricable knots in the heart. It's where spirit and matter are entangled in ways that they shouldn't be, actually. So now this verse is talking about how, when we see the self as the master, we are able to terminate that chain and basically cut off that knot in the heart of spirit and matter. That convoluted connection is cut off. So now, this is done by, this verse says one simple action, and the action is when one sees the self as the master. It's drishta evat manishware. And so when we say seeing the self as the master, it has two parts, because there's a similar verse which ends with Drishta Eva Kilat Mani. I think it's probably in the 11th canto. Sorry, I don't have that open, but we can look that up later if any of you wants to talk about it. But so this, you can see it as a continuum of a process where, starting with knowledge, we first see the self, which is the Atma in the individual, and then we move on to Akilatmani, and then we see Krishna, the Supreme Lord, as such. And that idea was that's the idea of cutting the knot. That's what last verse talked about, and the same idea is present in this verse where Prabhupada talks about seeing the individual consciousness, the individual self-consciousness, and then the supreme self-consciousness. So those two ideas are very clearly mentioned in the purport, and so we know where it starts. So it starts with knowledge, right? So that's what we have established from 1 to 21, and from the previous verse, it starts with knowledge. And using knowledge, we are going to try to arrive at both the self and we cannot arrive exactly at the Supreme Lord just through knowledge. We cannot do a process of just negation and arrive. So for that, we're going to take the help of noumenal knowledge. So if you see here, knowledge is two types. One is phenomenological and one is noumenal. This is from the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says there are two types of knowledge. Let me see if I have that open. Yes, so the first, in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna first says, Yata nyasasi tashrunu, you will completely know the knowledge from me. And then he goes on to say about jnanam teham savijnanam idam vakshyami asheshatah yat gyatva neha bhuyo nyaj jnatavyam avashishyate. So he's saying, I am no going to declare to you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and numinous. This being known, nothing further shall remain for you to know. So Krishna is our source. He is the ultimate, he's the perfect source of the knowledge. And he's going to help us cut the knots. That's what we saw in the previous verse. He's going to, in that purport, actually, Prabhupada mentions how Krishna cuts the knots himself. So Krishna is, so we are going to try to see how we can cut through the knots using both these processes. One is there's a phenomenological aspect to it, and there's a noumenal aspect to it. And that's why if you see in the 7th chapter, he gives explanations of both. He helps Arjuna. Arjuna doesn't need help, but it's for all of us. But anyway, so he helps Arjuna see both phenomenologically and from a noumenal perspective how Krishna is the ultimate source and how we can cut all our knots. So now these are the three things which I'm interested in talking about. So one is, let us try to arrive at the Atma through a phenomenological journey. And the phenomenological journey is related to consciousness, which is what Prabhupada talks in the purport. And then Prabhupada talks about Krishna being a Purusha, and then he's having para, creative energy. So we are going to touch a little bit about the impossibilities of impersonalism, and then we are going to talk about the importance of perception of the divine energy. So the perception of the divine through energy. Let me correct. So the perception of the divine through energy. So these are the three topics which I want to basically talk about. So now, so let's start with consciousness, right? So how do we arrive at the Atma? Like, so the first thing is, like I said, why study consciousness? I think I already mentioned the importance of consciousness as something that's really critical for us as Vaishnavas, as theists, and there is an attempt where I've heard some Anil Seth is a neuroscientist at University of Sussex in England, and he says, okay, so we had three big problems in the world. One was where are we in the universe, and the second problem is how did life come about, and then he says the last problem is consciousness. So now we already know where we are in the universe because we've sent our our space machines, and we know exactly where we are. Copernicus started working on it, and so we are exactly sure of where we are in the universe. Then the other problem is the origin of life. Okay, we have the Darwinian evolution method, and we have Francis and Crick's DNA, the understanding of how proteins or how they're coding for proteins and how life is formed. So now what remains? What is a hard problem? The only problem that remains actually for science to explain and basically complete its coup d'etat of theology in religious systems is consciousness. So we basically have nothing else left. Rest of the others are taken care of to a good level, and now only consciousness remains. And so consciousness was seen as something that's mostly philosophical, something that needs to be viewed from at least a philosophical perspective, if not religious theology. But now there has been a push into doing something like, okay, let's do it through neuroscience. Let's take a neuroscience approach to consciousness, and there've been different. That's been the kind of approach. So that's why we need to look at this hard problem of consciousness and what is the problem they're looking at, and how we, from the Bhagavatam, from a Bhakti Vedanta perspective, can offer the real explanation and the real the Atma paradigm for explaining consciousness as from both a phenomenological perspective and from a perspective of connecting with the Supreme Lord. So we all know about the conscious experiences we have. We have different touch, sight, smell, sound, and taste, and we know all this. So basically, this is kind of where Sankhya philosophy is actually involved, and we can. There are different ways to actually look at this idea from a Sankhya perspective. So the Sankhya perspective is looking at what are the ways we can analyze. Are there ways in which we can analyze the material nature? And we start with we don't know the nature of. Okay, so if we see something or if we experience something, we don't know about the nature of reality, right? But we know about the nature of experience, right? That's how we experience it. So now I know the nature of experience, and from the nature of experience, let me try to analyze what do these things mean, and is there something that's beyond the nature of experience? And that's what Sankhya philosophy is actually hitting at. So that's why I thought so since we're talking about Kapila Dev and his instructions, so let's take like a little bit of a Sankhya approach to arriving at consciousness. So we all know about the different experiences of consciousness we have. We have touch, sight, smell, sound, taste, and then some of the more like functions of mind and intelligence. We can say thinking, feeling, willing. We have streams of thought. We're able to discriminate between things, and those are certain things we all experience. And this is all again covered in some of the counting of the elements of material experience. So now, what is easy in terms of consciousness, right? So that's the first thing. So the easy problem of consciousness, and this is from the scientific perspective. So they say we understand a good amount about perception. We understand information integration because there's information is basically coming in from different senses. So we understand it. And when they say they understand integration, information integration and stuff, they're talking about just using functional magnetic resonance imaging to see how different neurons are working together in certain areas of the brain. There's a lot of caveats to be talked about, but let's not talk about it today. But they say, okay, so the easy problem of consciousness is we understand all perception, information, behavior control, verbal reports, and we can partially explain them using neural and computational process. But what is the hard problem of consciousness? So the hard problem of consciousness is actually qualia, and the hard problem of consciousness is something like, okay, so now let's say I see an object, right? I'm seeing an object in front of me. Let's say I'm seeing my computer screen. Okay, so this has so there's light that's hitting it, and then that's getting reflected onto my eyes. So that's getting onto me, and then it's being converted into something like it's converted into electrochemical reactions, and then there are neurons in the brain which are basically electrochemical signals. That's what is being sent from this screen up to my eyes and up to my brain. So now, how am I able to see a picture of the screen? How am I able to see like something like a screen, that it exists? It's not that I'm just aware of, I don't see it as, electrical flows or electrochemical flows. I see it as an actual object that I actually perceive. It's an object I can touch, it's an object I can deal with. I have an actual experience. So that is called actually qualia. And that is not something, and it includes everything. It's like it includes all colors, all sound, everything is all part of qualia. Like whatever you experience basically is, everything is qualia. Like if you see me wearing a specific, I don't know, is this red, brown, whatever, so this shirt, and then anything, whatever you see my black headphones, whatever you see, everything is actually qualia. Even me speaking, that's also qualia, because what's going into your ear is just vibrations, right? Those are material vibrations. So how do those material vibrations come together to form something where it's an actual experience for that person? And this is not just for, I'm not talking just about humans. All conscious beings have this experience, like animals to different levels, but they all have that experience. So what is generating that experience as such? And that's the big question. And this is called the hard problem of consciousness. And there are some materialistic theories, and I'm just going to quickly mention them. If you're interested, we can talk a lot about these, their weaknesses, the issues, and everything. But so one is panpsychism. They say, all right, let's say everything is conscious. That's actually true from a spiritual perspective, but this is what we have to be very careful. So this is a different kind of panpsychism. When they say everything is conscious, when scientists say everything is conscious, they mean something else. So they mean to say, okay, let's say space-time is not the fundament, consciousness is the fundament. So if consciousness is the fundament, then, well, I don't have to explain how certain chemicals, if they combine together, why they have to be conscious. So basically, a stone is also conscious in its own way. We don't know. Just give it like a million or billion years, whatever you want to give it, and then maybe it'll just turn into a human and become conscious. So a stone can produce soul, but we don't think a soul can produce stone. So that's kind of panpsychism. And then there's a lot of neurobiological materialism, which I spoke about earlier, the denial of the self, the denial of free will, and the idea that the self itself is a hallucination. These kind of ideas are also present, and it's controversial, but that's what they're pushing at. They're saying, okay, now we have all the scientific evidences using fMRIs and so on to show, okay, that you don't actually, there's no idea of self, there's no free will, it's just processes that are going on. And then there's functional and algorithmic materialism, which is saying, well, there are certain functions and algorithms, we just don't know what is it. Say, okay, there is a certain algorithm in which all the neurons interact. Basically, there is a function, there's a way in which if I algorithmically arrange certain digital signals, basically certain electrochemical signals, I can give you a picture. Like you can have a conscious experience. So that's one theory. And then there is the theory of illusionism. Consciousness is like it's just like an illusion. Epiphenomenalism, where it says, okay, it's just an epiphenomenon that came out. We don't have to worry about it. There's integrated information theory. There's where they say, okay, let's quantify mathematically how information is integrated such that it produces consciousness. And then there is the meta problem of consciousness, which is, this is very interesting. So the meta problem of consciousness says how, like, I understand that, okay, let's say we don't know anything about consciousness, but how is it that we feel strongly that consciousness is something we need to explain? Why are we so persuasive and fixated on that? It seems like we're revolving on that idea, either through religion or whatever. So why are we getting into that mode? So these are the different problems. Now, so we saw all these different ideas which they're trying to present, all their different thoughts and everything. But now we are going to see what intuitions can we take from all these materialistic ideas and phenomenal experiences, right? So these are all based on certain intuitions. So let's leave the conclusion aside. Let's leave the conclusion about consciousness aside, whether it be illusionism or whatever, and let's see what are the intuitions that we can take. And the reason why intuitions are very important and phenomenology is very important is because intuitions and phenomenology are not everything. That's the caveat. It's not everything. It's not going to establish, we're not going to intuitively establish just purely intuition based the nature of absolute nature of reality and the absolute truth. No, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, how can we use these different intuitions and different inferences that we have to build on to something that we would like to see as a very good explanation or a harmonized framework to talk about consciousness. That's the idea here. And intuitions is very important because if you see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he actually he he had a lot of he had a very uncanny way of dealing with some of the difficult problems. So to deal with Mayavadis, to deal with Shaivites and everything, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used very simple intuitions, right? So if someone came to him and told him, Lord Shiva is the greatest, and they talked to him about so many different shastric versions about it, different Puranas and everything. So Mahaprabhu says one very simple thing. Can you see Lord Shiva? Is he having Ganges on his head? And is Ganges the water that's washing the lotus feet of Narayana? That's it. You're done. Now build on these intuitions and you know the answer. And the same intuitive method he used for dealing with Venkatabhatta too. So when Venkatabhatta in South India, they had this discussion about Narayana and Krishna, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was pushing the idea of Krishna. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave a very simple, very intuitive approach. So his intuitive approach was, he took this one verse in the Bhagavatam where it says, Lakshmi Mata is trying to get into Krishna's pastimes in Braja. And he says, that's it. I'm done. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is uncanny intuitive process that he had. Of course, we are not trying to imitate him or anything, but my point is we can take some of our intuitions and try to build on this and see what is something we would like to know about consciousness. So what is the first thing we think is, we think it's metaphysical, right? And when we say metaphysical, we think there's a possible non-physical source of consciousness, right? That's our experience. That's a very basic experience that we all have. We understand consciousness should be metaphysical. And by the way, some of this is taken even from some philosophers who are very open to stating that consciousness is something we don't understand. Even some scientists who say, okay, we don't understand consciousness fully. There could be a possible non-physical source. We are not gonna self-aggrandize ourselves about how we understand everything. So this is from them, so you can understand, so these are very good intuitions. So we need something that's explanatory, but we also understand that there are limitations of materialistic method, and there is also the fact that we're able to gain knowledge. How we are able to it's not just if I didn't show you red at all, for the first 10 years of your life, doesn't mean that you can go out to the world and see how red looks like, right? So it seems to be something related to the way we acquire knowledge. There seems to be some idea of we're able to conceptualize philosophical zombies, which means we say we're able to conceptualize, just from an abstract perspective, people who have all the physical states and all and everything, but they don't have an internal experience. Like let's say an AI or something like that. It's an artificial intelligence or something. It gets in all the inputs and everything, but it's not having any internal experience of what it actually is. Like, talk about AI beating chess champions and everything, and then they're like, oh, now only the hard people who are like really the hard fanatics are still going to cling on to consciousness, and from a theological perspective. But there's still, again, the problem is it's still not having a full conscious experience. And then there's another thing which we see, which is the persistence of our self, our idea of the self. It's across time, space, and biophysical states. And then we also think that a solution to the meta problem of consciousness, which is a solution to why we think consciousness is hard and why we think we need an explanation for consciousness, should explain the hard problem itself, should explain the source of the hard problem itself. And then there's another issue, which is there seem to be certain conscious and unconscious neurological experiences. So when you say conscious and unconscious, what are those? Or is there some processing that's being presented to someone else? Is there a seer inside? And that's the question. So there must be some more, complete and consistent ways to explain consciousness, and all these scientific and other methods, they seem to be missing a lot of things. So now we have all these intuitions. So now we go to how do we arrive at the Atma? So arriving at the Atma, we are going to use Jiva Goswami's propositions. And this is what Srila Prabhupada actually talks about in 2.2.35 of the Bhagavatam. In his purport, he explains all this process, but they're basically derived from Jiva Goswami's propositions. And we can use this to go to an understanding of what we really are and how we can use consciousness as a bridge to get from a materialistic perspective to start seeing things from a spiritual perspective. So Jiva Goswami's 4 propositions. So his first proposition is, I exist as a conscious entity because I see, I feel, and I experience things, right? And this we all know is true. We see, we feel, and we experience things. This is the idea of qualia. So we are not dismissing something. So we are having an actual experience. Then the next one is, Jiva Goswami says, I am the witness of the content of my mind and actions of the body, right? So I'm able to see some of the actions of my body. I'm able to see some of the actions of my mind. So this is, for instance, if my mind is, let's say, going on a rabbit hole onto some ridiculous idea, like Prabhupada, I think he gives the example of something like, we've seen gold, we've seen mountains, and then you imagine something like a golden mountain, right? So it's like we are able to somehow observe it, right? So we are able to observe that. So we are the witness of the content of my mind and the actions of the body. And then the third proposition is, I remain the same unchanging witness throughout my life, right? And this means I remain the same witness right from my childhood. Like, I was the one who witnessed, like, probably my first day at middle school, first day at high school, first day of college, first day of here. But then if you just analyze me neurobiologically, so many changes that have happened, like biophysical changes, chemical changes, and so on. But then I remain the same unchanging witness throughout my life. And then Jiva Goswami's last proposition is, I am fundamentally different from my material body because I believe I exist for pleasure and the body is the seat of my suffering. This is a very interesting proposition because I think it handles 2 things. One is it handles the meta problem of consciousness. So the meta problem of consciousness is saying, if there should be a reason why I'm so obsessed about understanding what consciousness is, right? There should be some reason why I'm so obsessed. And maybe if I understand the reason why I'm obsessed with it, then maybe I can understand the source of consciousness as well. So now, Jiva Goswami's proposition deals with that, and he also starts to separate the body and the spirit. This is where he actually starts doing it. He says, now I exist for pleasure. This body is possibly the product of something that's not exactly what I want, and there should be some way in which I should be able to enjoy actual spiritual pleasure. So now these are the four propositions which Jiva Goswami proposes, and with that, now we have arrived at the Atma. So we've used consciousness. We have used consciousness to arrive at the Atma, and basically we have dismissed all of the, all of the materialistic theories by using these, mainly using Jiva Goswami's propositions, and they are actually based on the Hamsa Avtara's analytical method that is propounded to the Sanat Kumaras, because Hamsa Avtara actually, he starts with saying living entities, they experience different states: sleep, wakefulness, and dreaming. So what are these three different states? Now that's where he starts explaining. That's kind of the basic of Sankhya philosophy. That's kind of laying the very basic foundations of Sankhya philosophy. So based on that, Jiva Goswami builds all his propositions and he has presented it to us. And so the answer is, now, what is consciousness? Now we can define consciousness as the invariable concomitance of spirit, and it's different from matter, right? So now we have partially used Anumana and Pratyaksha Praman, which Prabhu spoke about last week. We took a phenomenological journey. We've used Jiva Goswami's propositions, and now we have arrived at the Atma. So now the Atma model. So now there's a confusion about what is the mind, what is the brain, and what is the locus of consciousness. And one possible locus of consciousness is the brain. But like Prabhupada says, consciousness is spread throughout the body. Like everything we experience throughout, that's coming to us through consciousness. So now this is the model that Khandadi Prabhu uses. And so this model is saying, let's say I'm here, I'm sitting in front of my computer, and I have a screen. I know there's a processor inside that's working, and then I have different signal sensors that are doing input-output functions. So basically, this headset I'm wearing, that's like the senses, and that's feeding in information to the system. Then the brain, that's doing the processing, and the mind is presenting what the brain has to the Atma, and the Atma is the actual user of the computer system. So now we have arrived at the Atma using a Sankhya method, and most importantly, we have crossed that point using the bridge of consciousness. So that's our starting point. And so if you want to look at the characteristics of Atma, so this is there in 7.7.19, and I'm just going to list out the characteristic, and then we'll pick one interesting characteristic which is related to what we have in this verse, then go on from there. So the different characteristics are: it is nitya, it has no birth, no death; it is avyayaha, no possibility of dwindling; shuddhaha, without material contamination of attachment and detachment; ekaha, individual, that's very important; and then kshetrajna, who knows and therefore is different from the material body; ashrayaha, the original foundation; avikreha, not undergoing changes like the body; swadrik, self-illuminated; hetuhu, the cause of all causes; vyapakaha, spreading throughout the body in the form of consciousness; asangi, not depending on the body, free to transmigrate from one body to another. So now, and the last one is anavritaha, not covered by material contamination. So if you actually analyze all these characteristics, you can actually, I think there's a way to very efficiently prove that there's an isomorphism between Jiva Goswami's propositions and the characteristics of Atma here. So this basically covers all of the propositions of Jiva Goswami. And like I said, we all saw how much it is connected to our intuitions and how we had a very phenomenological journey to the Atma. So now, the most important point here, which I want to focus on, is the idea of self-illumination. And the reason why self-illumination is important is because this idea is what Prabhupada talks in the purport. He talks about Krishna being Swayam Jyoti. So this characteristic of the Atma, of self-illumination, is derived, swadrik, right? So swadrik is the word, self-illuminated. That's what is derived from the Supreme Lord, who is Swayam Jyoti, self-illuminated. So for me personally, relative to this verse, the most important quality of the Atma, self-illumination. And the reason why I specifically like this point about self-illumination, because it deals with the Cartesian theater problem from Daniel Dennett. So Daniel Dennett is a philosopher, is an atheistic philosopher. So whenever whenever there has been philosophical or theological ideas about the existence of a seer, of someone who sees, that's kind of sits inside your body and witnesses what the brain is presenting. He says, okay, well, okay, now we've got someone who's seeing that, but then what is the process that he uses to see? So does it mean the person who's inside that body, he needs another person to see, then he needs another person to see, basically ad infinitum. So this is the problem of infinite regress. So the idea of self-illumination is very important because it deals with this Cartesian theater problem of infinite regress. That means the soul in and of itself is capable of self-illumination. It means it knows, it experiences both good and bad, it experiences a lot of things. So its experience, whether the soul is actually affected or not, that's a different question. That depends on the level of conditioning relative to its interaction with the hierarchy of the senses, intelligence, and the mind. Senses, intelligence, and the mind. But the point is, the Atma as such is self-illuminating, and it's drawing that capacity from the Lord. And what is the source of self-illumination? We saw that it's the Lord. And 15.6 of Bhagavad Gita talks about how Krishna, Goloka, or the Vaikuntha planets do not need any external illumination. They're just illuminated by himself. The energy is coming from him. And then how did it come to the material world? That's reflected basically in this purport. Actually, we see that Prabhupada gives the example of the sun and the moon and how they're reflecting actually the light of the Brahma Jyoti. But that doesn't mean the sun or the moon is the ultimate. It's kind of saying it's reflecting the actual real light, and the actual real light is in the spiritual world. And we know in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about the upside down banyan tree, where he says the material world is a reflection. The roots are all in the spiritual world, and then the branches are here. So at the root is Krishna and his self-illumination. And then here in the material world, we have the effect on the sun, which is reflecting the light, and then the moonlight, which draws its light from the sun and reflects it. And that's what Prabhupada talks about in this purport. But the Atma itself is pure. It has its own self-illumination. And okay, all right. So now we've established that the Atma has self-illumination. So what is the first implication of self-illumination? So let's say, call it like lights on. I think it's interesting. The idea of self-illumination is very interesting because I know a lot of philosophers, when they talk about conscious experience, neuroscientists, they talk about this idea of lights on, where, it's like, the lights are on and everything, it's like lights on. So I think it's a very interesting idea. So the direct result is in 1322, Krishna says, Purusha prakritisto hi bhungte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangosya sadasatyo janmasu. That means the living entity, because of his interaction with Prakriti, he starts to experience good and bad. So the first thing about self-illumination is we are having good and bad experiences. We experience both happiness and distress. That's from 632 in Bhagavad Gita, which says, Atmopayena sarvatra samam pashyati yorjuna sukham va yadiva dukam sayogi paramo mataha. Sukham va yadiva dukam means the living entities, they experience both happiness and distress, and that's because of this lights on, which is the self-illumination of the Atma. So now we've talked about Atma. So now we are going to talk about the nature of Godhead, which is Ishvara. So now, what is the most important attribute of the personal form of Godhead, right? Because here Krishna is talking about you see Krishna, first Prabhupada talks about Purushaha, and then finally he talks about Mayavada. So what is the exact relation? And in between he talks about energy. So what is the connection between all these different ideas between Godhead, between Mayavada philosophy, and energies? And that is what is the most important attribute of the personal form of Godhead? Is it name? Is it form? Is it relationship? Jiva Goswami, in his technical definition of Bhagavan, he says the most important. So this is actually, I'm just running over this stuff because I think we're just running out of time. But it's a very interesting definition of Bhagavan. If we have time, we can kind of read this on later. But he says, he who is the very form of existence, consciousness, and bliss, who possesses inconceivable, multifarious, and unlimited age energies that are of his own nature. That's his first definition of Bhagavan. So Jiva Goswami actually doesn't say Aishwarasya Samagrasya, Viryasya Yashasasriya, which talks about the 6 opulences. He says the most important definition of Bhagavan is that he has potencies and he is able to interact with other energies. That's the most important definition. So now, this is the exact verse which actually Prabhupada talks about in the purport here, right? In this purport, Prabhupada talks about the verse from Vishnu Puran, and we are going to look at that verse. I think it's a very critical verse to understand the energy of the Lord and the importance of the Lord's energy. So now, this is the verse. This is from Madhya 210. This is the verse actually which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks to Sanatana Goswami. And surprisingly, interestingly, this is the verse right after Jivera Swarupa Hoy Krishnera Nityadas. So this is the verse that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains to Sanatana Goswami. So we can understand this is like it's really in there, it's kind of the foundational, it's one of the foundational principles of our Vaishnava movement. Our personal connection with the Lord is based on this verse. It's based on the energies of the Supreme to prove that he is a person who has energies and who can interact, and he's not like an impersonal abstract concept. So this is the verse. Ekadesha sitasyagnir jyotsna vistariniyata parasya brahmana shaktis tadedam akilam jagat. So the translation is, just as the illumination of a fire, which is situated in one place, is spread all over, the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Parabrahman, are spread all over this universe. So this is a very important verse because it clarifies the relationship between Krishna and his energies, and Prabhupada quotes it in this purport because this is the key definition. This is part of the key definition of what will lead us to a personal and personal relationship with the personal Lord, with Purusha, and based on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy. So now, the interesting idea, why this energy is so important. So here, so it's very interesting. So actually, I didn't know about this. I read it I came to know about it from Sodra Swami. So he says this. So this is the common man. He's asking, well, I don't see God as such in this world, but I see so many different varieties and energies like light, heat, and fire. How is God connected to these things? And then the Mayavada idea is, the relationship between Brahman and its energy is not to be questioned. You can ask me anything else. So this is actually true. They have a term for it. It's called avicharaniya. That means it's not something that's subject to question and analysis. So that's where we are really different. And the idea of Krishna and his energy that actually defines us. And it's not just from a philosophical perspective. We are going to move on to the Bhakti Yogi perspective, which says the Lord is the source of all these energies, and you can use these energies to appreciate the Lord. But the most important part is that his energies or under his supervision continuously. So that's a very interesting idea, and that's the Bhakti Yogi perspective. And you can see the lotus coming out of Mahavishnu's navel, and everything being under the energy and control of the Supreme Lord. So now, um, what is actually the source of all these energies? So now we experience different energies, right? So they seem to be like, let's say, physical things, like, let's say, like sun, moon, and everything. But how about the energies of our action, of our interaction with the world, the way we act, and the way we have certain emotions and everything? So the actual source of all these energies is actually the three internal energies of the Lord. So the spiritual modes of nature, that's the point from which all the material energies emerge, right? So, and those three are Samvit, Sandhini, and Hladini, right? And so the Samvit is actually closely related to the idea of knowledge, right? So that is knowledge. And then Sandhini is actually closely related to the idea of perception, right? The perception of the Lord, the perception of the existence of the Lord everywhere. And then finally, Hladini is actually the pleasure potency of the Lord, whose final form is actually it's Radharani. So she is the final representation of the Hladini Shakti. So these are the three spiritual sources of energy, and that's what is being transformed into different material energies. And here, Prabhupada makes it very clear that Krishna is above the modes of these, above all the material modes. That's what the verse says, right? That's the line about being transcendental to the modes. So Krishna is only influenced by these, not influenced, rather, he controls and manages these three internal energies, and he's touched only by the internal energies and not by any material energy. So now we're going to see one small story, and then we'll see one verse, and then we're going to conclude. I think I'm running out of time, just another few minutes. So now, so this verse, so we saw a lot about the perception of Krishna, right? How do we perceive Krishna? What is the perception of the divine? And so we saw that he's the source of all energies and everything. So how do we, in our everyday life, right? How do we, living entities, how do we understand, how do we build basically our spiritual life in relation to these three energies? I think that's what we're going to see through a quick example, and that's the story of Brahma, the universe's first conscious jiva, right? So now we know that Brahma came out of the lotus that came out of Brahma was seated on the lotus that came out of Mahavishnu's Nabi, right? So it came out of that Nabi, and Brahma is there, and he doesn't know how to create. He doesn't know what he's here for. He actually is in a confused state. And the first thing he does, he actually goes down the lotus, right? And this is the thing we talked about earlier when we built our intuitions, we built Jiva Goswami's propositions. It's saying, let's start with what we know. Let's start with the nature of experience, right? The nature of experience might be probably certain material objects, right? But let's start with investigating that, right? So the first thing Brahma does, he starts with investigating material object, right? The lotus is, of course, it's in touch with Krishna, but that's a different thing. But now, from a learning perspective, he starts investigating that lotus, right? Then, when he goes through that, then he hears Krishna's sound, right? He hears Mahavishnu's vibration of the word tapa, right? So the word tapa comes out, and it's penance. And Brahma understands that this is what he's supposed to do, right? So then he develops, like you see, it's an evolution of Prabhupada talks a lot about the evolution of the soul and everything. We're going to talk about a spiritual evolution of consciousness, right? So now he starts. So first thing is he analyzes matter around him. That's his first step. Then he reaches knowledge, because he has this understanding that it is possible that there is someone above him, that he's not all in all. So when he starts that, the first experience is knowledge. In there, he comes in touch with the Samvit Shakti of Krishna. And then he goes back, he acts on the knowledge actually. And by acting on the knowledge, he spends he spends a lot of years, 100 years or something, in meditation, in penance for Krishna. And there's non-deceptive penance. And after that non-deceptive penance, the Krishna himself comes and reveals his spiritual plan. And he says, this is the perfection of perception, right? This is the ultimate perception you can have. There's a verse which says, this is the ultimate perception, my dear Brahma, this is the ultimate perception you can have, right? So then he comes in touch with the Sandhini Shakti. Then finally, a very interesting thing happens. There's a very personal connection between between the Lord and Brahma, because Krishna gets up, he comes, he smiles, and then he gives him a handshake. So that's the Hladini handshake. That's the personal interaction. So Prabhupada actually says Brahma and the Lord are actually in a mood of Sakya Rasa. That's the interaction between both of them. So he experiences the beauty of that in that handshake. That's imagistic representation. It actually physical occurrence of that instantiation of that Hladini energy. So you can see all these three different. You can see all these different states, and this is the story of the first jiva of the universe, right? And so that means there's a lot we can learn from the story of Brahma. And what we can learn is we have to start by observing material nature around us. That's what Sankhya philosophy will help. It will help us observe it in the right way, right? So that we'll be able to use phenomenology to build bridges, to have the initial start. So once we build those beautiful bridges using phenomenology to something higher, then we come in touch with Samvit, which is the Shastra. The two S's, Samvit, which is Shastra, which is giving us knowledge. And then in that case, Krishna himself gave the knowledge of Tapa. And then we start with perception, right? That's the sight, right? Sandhini, it's sight. How do we see the material world? Seeing the material world as being something that's coming as part of the banyan tree, like in Bhagavad Gita, something that's having its roots in the spiritual world and just branches here. So that's the sight. And then the next is the final position, the final achievement of living entities progress towards basically spiritual evolution of consciousness. The final is Hladini, which is actually the love of Godhead, which slowly will come at a certain time. So Brahma was motivated by the Hladini handshake. He was guided by the Samvit sound, and his vision is tinted with Sandhini sight, right? So now he has a perception, and he's able to see that he's able to take out that perception of the spiritual world. Now he's going to carry it on to all of the different experiences that he's going to have with respect to creation, dealing with the material energy, right? So this is based on actually this is from this idea of Sandhini Samvit and Hladini is actually from Chaitanya Charitamrita. So I thought it's a good connection with the story of Brahma and how, as a living entity, specifically with the Sankhya framework in the background, where it starts with an interest in observing material conditions, material objects, because that's what we can see initially, right? We're not able to see Krishna right from day one. We see the sun, we see the moon, we see material objects, and those are all Krishna's energy. So basically, we search through that energy, we build phenomenological bridges to the experience of the Lord. And I want to finally end with one beautiful prayer. That's because we have seen that Purusha, Krishna is a person, and he is the final. It's a personal form of Godhead. That's the ultimate, and because he's a Purusha, because he's a person, we can have a very personal relationship with him, and that personal relationship with the Lord is based on variegatedness, right? And that's the energy that Jiva Goswami defines in his Sandarbha, and that's what Prabhupada also talks about. It's that energy which can help us have a subjective relationship with the Lord. And I want to end with this prayer from Bhagavatam. It's just 1 second. Yes. So this is the verse which talks about Krishna's entry into the wrestling arena in Mathura and how different people perceived him. Because here we've spoken about Krishna's energy, we've spoken about perception, we focused a lot on using our phenomenology to arrive at the Atma, but we didn't use it to understand how we can relate with Krishna. So I want to say this prayer and then just I'll close it after that. So this is the verse from 10th canto. This describes Krishna's entry into the wrestling arena. And we can actually say this beautiful prayer to Krishna because he's an actual person. And we should be actually so thankful to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to Jiva Goswami, and all the various acharyas who've given us this beautiful personal connection with the Lord, where we can perceive him in a number of different ways, and we can savor our individual subjective relationship with him. So now this is the verse. I want to recite it because I think it's really good. So it goes like this. Mallanam ashanir rinam naravaraha strinam smaro murtiman gopanam swajano satam kshitibujam shasta swapitro shishuhu mrityur bhojapater virada vidusham tatvam param yoginam Krishninam paradeviteti vidito Rangam gata sagrajaha. So this verse talks about when Krishna entered the wrestling arena, how different people viewed him, right? How different people viewed him in different ways. And so the wrestlers saw Krishna as their enemy, as a lightning bolt who was coming to smash them. The men of Mathura saw him as the best of males. Women saw him as Cupid personified. The cowherd men saw him as their relative. Empire's rulers as a chastiser. The parents felt like they had a Vatsalya bhava with Krishna. Kamsa felt death. He thought death himself personified is coming. And the unintelligent people, they saw just the universal form of the Lord. Yogis saw him as absolute truth. And Vrishnis thought of him as someone that belongs to their family. It's a very supreme worshipable deity of their family. So all of these beautiful personal connections with the Lord are only possible through two things. One, the Lord has to be a person, and he has to have energies to interact. So anything we see in the world, I think this is an amazing prayer to meditate on, because we see so many different things in the world, and we think, how is this related to Krishna? I'm going to work, I go to grad school, whatever. Like I have so many different experiences. How do I reconcile that nature of experience with the absolute nature of reality that's presented in our Vedantic tradition, right? That's the big question. I think this prayer is a great start, because we can pray to Krishna that in somehow, through some of my experiences, right? Through some of my experiences, please help me savor that subjective relationship with you, because you are a person and I'm having a conscious experience of what's going on in this world. And it's a very conscious experience that we can try to have, very subjective experience with the Lord. I think this verse is a great way to think of how we can interact with the Lord in a personal way and in relation to all of the nature of experiences that we have in this world. Thank you very much, Prabhus and Mataji. Sorry if I ran over time. I just want to stop with that. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Bol Prabhuji. Thank you very much. I think the knowledge has gone from Abu Dhabi to US now. So it is evident now. America has one more knowledgeable person.
Prabhu, actually, sorry to interrupt you. Really sorry. Just I want to actually talk about where I got all this stuff from, because none of it is mine. Everything is from these 4 sources. So this is the Atma paradigm by His Grace Akandadi Das, Radhika Raman Prabhu's work on Jiva Goswami Sandarbhas, and this amazing book, which I just got yesterday, The Subjective Evolution of Consciousness, The Play of the Sweet Absolute. This is Sridhar Swami, who's a disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, and I just got it yesterday. I already read it once, and I was planning on reading it after the class today, but I read it once yesterday. I'm already halfway through it for the second time. So it's an amazing book, and if you can get your hand on it, it's so amazing. Such a beautiful bridge between consciousness and the Supreme Lord. I think this is such an amazing book. So if any of you are interested in this topic and this book, please let me know and we can chat about it like offline. So sorry to interrupt you, Prabhu. I just wanted to present this book. Really sorry. Go ahead, Prabhu. Sorry.
Yeah, Prabhu, it was nice to hear so many. Actually, some of it is really high level stuff, and to understand and to meditate on them, I think, at least personally, I think I need more time to understand and what you said exactly. But many of things we could understand quite a bit. And I request devotees, if they have any questions or any jigyasa or any comments, they can share and ask.
Yes, Prabhu. I think I'm not qualified to answer questions. I think senior devotees should. But if there's something I can just contribute my little way, I'm happy to.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Very
Hare
beautiful
Krishna.
class.
Hare Krishna. Hindu.
Prabhuji, I just want to ask this question. How do a jiva get intuition? And what is the reason the jiva get intuition? Is intuition the sixth sense?
So intuition, is it something more like the sixth sense we're talking about, like predicting future? Is that or is it, because
Yeah,
it's a very
sometimes we get to know that something is going to happen, and profoundly it happens after a period of time. So is it the way of Supreme Lord telling us that this is going to happen? So how is it connected?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. It's a little slippery slope. I think I want to let the senior Vaishnavas answer this, but like personally, what I feel is this is a little bit of a dicey territory, because there is one issue here. It is definitely possible that the Lord is giving, is pushing out some from the heart. He speaks out. I know Prabhupada talks about the Lord being the conscience within. So that is absolutely, like, that's definitely the voice of Paramatma. There's no doubt about that. But there are some cases where the mind is a strange, it's called like hazy consciousness. So Sridhar Maharaj actually calls it hazy consciousness. So it has a tendency to kind of take over some roles, to override certain even logical conclusions or certain things. Because I know there's a verse in the Bhagavatam which says the mind has the capability to act. Sometimes it acts as if it's the soul. It acts as if it's anything. So I would say it's very important to pay attention to the intuitions. Like in the story of Brahma, everything starts with attention. Devotional life actually starts with attention, and action comes after. So it starts with attention, and we have like an amazing system. Like if you have an intuition, we have a 3-way system. It's check and balance is Guru Sadhu Shastra. So if you have some strong intuitions about anything specific, I'm talking more from the spiritual perspective, it's always good to go to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. But if you have a specific intuition about, let's say it's like a premonition to something that's going to go wrong, I think it's always good to do what Rupa Goswami suggests with Guhya Makyati Prichyati, where you can talk about the inner intuitions that you have with another devotee. And I think it's a very powerful tool. Recently, I was hearing Nirakula Mataji here at the Gaurav Purnima initiation ceremony, where she spoke about the importance of sharing your innermost feelings with another devotee. So anytime, of course, it has to be someone you trust and someone who can give you guidance and everything, Mataji. But if you can, I think that's a good way to look at how to deal with intuitions. Is my idea, but I think I would let the senior Vaishnavas talk about this, like Giridhari Prabhu, Sadashiv Prabhu, whoever else.
Okay. Now we're just going to forget to send the play.
Sorry.
The exam will not be there. Any exam should not be there from now on.
Is it Chaitanya Bhagavan Prabhu? I think.
Yeah, Hare,
voice
Hare Krishna. Yeah,
clear?
actually, I had a question. First of all, thank you so much, Prabhu. And you have got, I think, you are in early age, developed such a knowledge, and especially our conventional preaching, where because especially where you are, and community who want a scientific evidence for this kind of connections. And so for that I pray that you means serve in more way. So that is my prayer, because this kind of in early age developing and knowing so many things, and which is required for preaching to the scientific community. So I pray for that, Prabhu, sincerely for you.
Thank you
And
so much, Prabhu.
and
I
it is
think,
yeah.
yeah, I think there's like a lot of good work, and I highly encourage people to look at the Atma Paradigm series by Akandari Das. He's associated with the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He has some amazing work, and all my stuff on consciousness, everything is from him. He has some amazing presentations. So if you're interested in this kind of ideas, you please let me know, because I'm really excited about this. So.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Only one point you already told at the end of your lecture, like where you said that Brahma, who is the basically first living entity in the whole creation, who himself tried initially to to find his source of origin, and he through this stem he moved, and then he did the austerity. And probably what I could understood from your statement, that he then could actually achieve a personal connection with the Lord,
Yes.
not through his endeavor in a way of finding himself, but
Yep.
to follow a instruction of like tapaha, and means doing the
Yes.
devotional service. So it looks like essence is for like many of us, like or in general many people are not having that much knowledge. But if they take up this teaching from Brahma's pastime, that they
Yes.
just so if that is my understanding, then it is means what I mean to say, devotional service, if somebody just take up in at the beginning without knowing much of it's like then also he can get the achieve the personal connection with the Lord.
Yes,
And to
Prabhu, definitely. It has nothing to do with knowledge, and renunciation are concomitant effects of bhakti. That's what the Bhagavatam says, right? So I was talking from more like a scientific presentation, because
correct,
I started with intuitions and Jiva Goswami's presentations. So from
correct.
that perspective, but definitely knowledge and renunciation are concomitant factors of bhakti, and that's established in the second chapter of first canto of Bhagavatam. So it doesn't matter at all. And if there are some souls who just don't need knowledge, they just need just that single vibration of pure sound, and that's it. They don't need anything. I am a highly conditioned soul who needs a lot of this, scientific
No, Prabhu, and
uh,
also your class, Prabhu, reminds me, and you have already mentioned in your references, source references, that Radhika Raman Prabhu, and it reminds me that class, because I think Radhika Raman Prabhu extensively he has worked on this, like Jiva Goswami's work, and
yes.
normally in our normal preaching, conventional preaching, out of 1,000 lectures, probably you'll get such kind of things. And nice to see you, Prabhu, in that way presenting the things, which is highly required for at least connecting the people who are totally scientific. They do not want to take up anything apart from some solid like connection. And Srila Prabhupada many a times he used to fond of the getting scientists to for preaching in these areas. So
Yes,
thank
Prabhu.
you again, Prabhu. Thank you so much, and I pray for you. Hare Krishna, Hare Bol.
That's very true. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Please continue to bless me, that I keep thinking about these things. Thank you.
I would request Sajjan Prabhu to just guide on this point which Mataji just asked Simi Mataji about this intuition, and I think uh, our Kripna Vasla also pointed out that intuition can be from mind or can be from soul, if depending on the person, what consciousness he has. So just elaborate on this point, Prabhuji. I think for everybody's, if you are able to speak something more on this intuitive part.
Hare Krishna, Dennett question. That's actually he has answered very nicely how to use the material intuition and spirituality. Yes, he deciphered very nicely. I think I don't want any point to add on this, but usually intuition means it comes from the mind because mind always is anchoring for something. Spiritual intuitions comes from the soul, and that comes from Krishna. Paramatma guides. Sometimes he instructs. No, we think something and then we experience that. Because this is because of you know this Krishna's will be based on we are following Krishna consciousness and how sinless we are. It is mentioned that in the Bhagavatam that Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra was instructed by Krishna personally at least give 5 pieces of land, 5 villages for them to rule. Bhagavatam tells 3:9, I think Shatapunya Leshaha, because of the bereft of the last
Farthing.
farthing of uh, pious credits. So they could not hear the inner voice of Paramatma. And the Maharaj says that the moment we are sinful, then the inner voice of Paramatma will not stop talking, and you will not give any intuition. And you will act only on the mind, based on the intuition from the mind, which will be on the material platform, which will be on the modes of material nature, and all the decisions you take, concomitant reactions will be very bad because results are based on the mind. That's why Kripana Vatsala told very nicely that even the material institution also should go as per the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. We should go and consult with our Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and also that's why Gukya Makat Prachati. That means we have to go and consult the devotees whom we have confidential relationship, and even if the material things are there, this is what my intuition comes. Whether I can take the decision right or not. At the time, we have to go and consult with the pure devotees. And that is always the best. But over what happens sometimes the mind is so powerful. And the Prabhupada writes in the purport of I think 8:2:31 that if you are very sinful, you cannot come to the right decision. Just like Gajendra, the right decision to take shelter of Krishna, when he was trapped. At the time he took Prabhupada writes in the purport that he could not come to the right conclusion or a right intuition. It's Adabhipadyata. He came to the right decision where he took shelter of Krishna. So he understood Krishna is the only shelter. So intuition, material, mind, mostly we are all condemned by the conditional nature. So we always take decisions made on the material mind, which is not on the transcendental platform. So it is based on our pious credits which we have. So that's what it happens. So it's not based on mind. It is based material. It depends on the individual. The devotee is very good devotee. Krishna instructs from within. That's it. Yes, Prabhupada, the nice example is that the doctors told him and the devotees told him that he was bedridden in 1977. And everybody told that he should not take anything hot, puris, sabjis, and all. Prabhupada said,
Yeah.
my says I should take prashadam. I should take hot puris and
Yes, yes.
kachoris. And then he
Yeah,
took
yeah.
the hot puris and kachoris. So,
Bhavatarani.
because that means he is controlled, Bhavatarani made, and he took the hot puris and kachoris. That is based on the transcendental platform. Because he was never guided by his own material mind or intelligence. In our case, we are all conditioned. So we should always, as Kripana Vatsala says very nicely, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Whether a material intuition or a spiritual intuition, we should also abide by the Acharya, spiritual master, and Krishna. That you took, then it's very good. That's how we should be. Kripana Vatsala, is it okay? What I said?
Yeah, yeah. No.
Uh,
Thank you, Prabhuji. Beautiful explanation.
Haribol, if any more devotee has more queries or questions or comments. Krupana Vatsala, can you just throw some elaborate little bit more on this soul is self-eliminated, and then you showed a picture where there was mind inside mind and the seer inside seer
Yes.
or something like that.
Yeah, yes.
I think
So this idea, yes, Prabhu. Yeah, actually, so there is when we are saying the soul is so the problem is this is actually not a problem for us, like as devotees. Like from a materialistic perspective, it's called infinite regress, where it's equivalent to saying like God. If you say God, if you tell a scientist like God is the source of everything, he asks like who created God? No, it's something like that. If you're saying the soul is inside the body and is activating and doing everything, it's like what is behind that soul? It's something like that. So it's like, does the soul again have another soul inside it? How does it like where do you end it? That's kind of the thing. So it's, so if you say so the example which we gave before was the like the user sitting in front of the computer, right? And he's watching something that the brain is presenting to him. The brain and the mind, through the mind, it's being presented to him, and that user is watching it. So now let's say this is the model I talk about, just material perspective. Now I can ask like who is watching, like to say he watches that, like what is inside him? Like does he have another system like this where someone is watching it inside him? Like it's like it just keeps going on and on. It's like who created God? Okay, then it's someone else. Now who created that person? Who created that person? So this problem is called like infinite regress. You're saying like if I give you an answer, like I would say like where did you get that from? Where did you get that from? Basically they don't accept it. We accept it as the fundament, like it's a fundamental indivisible idea, like the soul. There's nothing more smaller than the soul. It's the fundamental unit of consciousness, but they don't accept it. So when they don't accept it, they think of these kind of like funny ideas. And it's also related to, that's why actually like I skipped through the slide, but it says the Atma is sui generis. It's a philosophical term which says it's the smallest unit of this field, like you cannot break it, like there's nothing more to break. Like if you say like an atom, they say okay, what's inside the atom? There are like protons, neutrons, whatever. So what's inside it? And then there's quarks, and what's inside it. So there's always the scientific mind of saying okay, what's inside that? Like what is it made of? And I think this just Swadrik or
They want to,
Swine.
they want to scopically
Yeah.
get into it. Everything,
Yes.
just get
Yes.
inside it.
Yeah. Get
That's a
inside.
good
Like what's?
idea, but
Yeah, sorry.
That's why you related this to the self-illumination, how it answers this question. I
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
it now.
Yes. So that's why it ends that point. It's like that's it. We're not talking anymore about what's inside the Atma. That's the unit itself, and it's illuminated itself. And that's drawing from Krishna's ability to self-illuminate. That's the Swayam Jyoti idea in the purport. So sorry.
I
Yeah.
think
Yes,
that's
Prabhu.
wonderful. I think, but we need to hear your class one more time. I believe to understand many terminologies you have spoken, and some of it we could get it, and some of it we just lost it actually
Oh,
because so
sorry.
many. But we want to hear this more to at least because as Chaitanya Bhagavan Prabhu said that now the challenges in preaching is basically the questions are basically scientifically driven and you have to answer them scientifically, and that's what you have tried here, and you are successful also. Only thing is our tiny brains are not able to understand certain part of it. The initial slide at least I need to meditate more, and you can I would like to hear the recording of this if I think it is recorded, I believe, but we'll try to get it. And once I hear the first few slides, the later slides I could understand, but the first few slides I need to understand a bit more, and I'll definitely send you some queries based
Sure,
on that.
bro. I'm very interested in talking about these ideas and everything. Something it's just personally out of my own interest. I think it's very interesting. So yes,
The,
we can definitely connect. Definitely offline. I'm actually
the
waiting
best
for
part
that.
the best part of this class is how you have related the Sankhya with whatever terminologies has been you have learned from the books, and those because Sankhya is the starting point of spiritual knowledge
Yeah.
in most people who who don't know about spirituality. And then when we relate this with modern experiences, scientific experiences, really it should go in very well to the new persons. And that's what you have tried here. And I really it's a really good experience for me to attend this class. And definitely please if you are able to share this slide also in this
Yes.
forum, that would be really good.
How do I share it? Like, should I just send it, or
Yeah, send
I
it
don't know.
across in the WhatsApp group or Manso, or send it to
Okay.
Sajjan Prabhu if you are not
Okay,
able to
I'll
share
send
it.
it to my dad. He can send. Yes. Yeah, and actually, yeah, it's all from this. Like, none of I don't have the brain to think about these ideas from. It's all from this Atma paradigm. It's a webinar
But
by Akhanda Das.
you triggered the idea to everybody's mind through this class
Yes.
from this book. But, so
I
that's a
was
good
so
thing.
excited about seeing that. Actually, I'm really excited about that. The whole seminar. So, if any of you are interested, please do let me know. We can chat about it. I'm very excited, actually. So.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, any more devotees would like to speak?
Hare Krishna.
Or
Kripana Vatsala, I want to ask you, go to the one slide where you talk about the brain, senses, and all. That PowerPoint, yeah. I just want to ask a question.
This one?
Yes, yeah, please. Yes, that's the
Yes.
one. That's very good. Huh?
Yep.
Especially you're talking about the signal sensors, input processor, user interface, user. Very good. But here, I just want to ask a question. Here, Atma, mind, and senses. Okay, these are all subtle. Brain is material, you know. How come?
Hmm.
How come you are linking this to this?
Sorry, brain linking in
No,
the
no.
sense?
You see, Atma, mind.
Mhm.
Atma Atma is a soul. No problem.
Subtle, yes.
Mind and
Subtle.
senses also are subtle. But
Mhm.
brain is material. How come
Yeah.
it's connected? That's
Yeah.
what
So
I want to know. Arriving at Atma. Yes.
yes. So now this brain is actually like, so all the sensory inputs we have, right? So those are all converted to, like, from a scientific view, those are all converted to like physical signals, like electrical signals. Like if I'm seeing something, okay, let's say I say something, right? I'm saying A, like, so that's what I'm doing is I'm pushing air, I'm creating a vibration, right? So that vibration is entering my eardrum. So it's propagating as a sound wave, right? Sorry, as a movement, and that movement is actually going to my brain, where it's converted to an electrochemical signal. So that electrochemical signal is what is in the brain. The mind is what translates that what is in that brain to the Atma. The mind is the screen. The processor is taking in all the physical different, so many different physical. The brain is like a physical thing, but it's taking in all the different inputs, like so many different inputs, then putting certain things together, and like removing certain things, because that's essential for like perception, for sound and everything. Like we don't see, like if I see a screen, I'm only seeing certain things, but I don't actually see, like let's say I'm seeing like a rainbow, I'm seeing the color of the sky. There's so many different, but I have to like extract the things which are most necessary for me, and that's what the brain is doing. And it's presenting, and the mind is taking that and presenting it to the Atma.
That's the reason we can say that suppose a person had a brain injury, so you lose the consciousness, and
Mhm.
all the signals gets terminated. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. The Atma is not seeing anything, so you don't see the effect of consciousness. Basically, the Atma is not seeing anything.
Even though it is material, but it is very powerful.
Yeah, it's very, very powerful, because that's how it's going to communicate the different things from the senses. Like anesthesia, right? You take anesthesia, you become unconscious. It's a chemical, but the Atma is totally subtle and spiritual. So how do we connect these two? So the way it's connected is the brain is actually like the thing that helps to present something. Let's say the signals are all like, if there is no signal to present to the Atma, then what will the Atma see? The Atma is unable to see anything. Of course, the Atma can function without the brain. There are very specific examples where you don't, like, there are cases where there are like people have lost their entire skull, like they hardly have any skull, and still they're able to function. That's because the Atma is self-illuminated. But I'm talking about general cases. This is how it works. But there are very interesting cases where like people have like 2%, 3% of the actual typical brain content of a human being, and they're still able to talk, feel, and do so many things. I think those examples are there in the Atma paradigm. So actually, Prabhu gives those, Akandati Prabhu gives those examples of what happens in that case. So that's where he says the brain model fails. The brain is not all in all. So that's where the brain model fails, and you need the Atma, actually. Because there are certain...
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, this particular slide actually shows the difference between brain and mind, which I could never understand very well. I think this is some very clear here. So how the mind is different from the brain.
Yes, Prabhu. Actually, this is very interesting because this is not the model which Drutakarma Prabhu or Chaitanya Charan Prabhu use. They have only a 3-level model. They say software, hardware, and user. That's Atma, mind, intelligence, and false ego, and then like all it's the brain and mind, and then there is the physical. So I actually like found like I had a lot of time because I'm kind of interested in some of the neuroscience aspects, and for a long time I actually struggled to deal like I couldn't get that with the 3-level model. So this 4-level model actually puts in some other things into perspective. So thank you, Prabhu. I also had the same issue as you. Like I always had that confusion. So this 4-level model actually helped me understand it better, actually, than the 3-level model.
All your slides need.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Karthik, Krupana Vatsala, you were telling about the same case the past time Amma was mentioning about this the goat head for Daksha, correct? His consciousness was changed, correct?
Yeah.
Even though head was cut off.
Yes.
And then the goat head was fed. But his consciousness was not
changed. Yes, it's like this, and
Exception.
consciousness doesn't change across lifetimes, actually. Like across lifetimes, consciousness is constant. This is a very interesting example. The effect of the goat. Yes, absolutely. I didn't think of it. It's so interesting because I am trying to actually study split brain issues, because scientists have used the split brain problem where like if you separate the brain into 2 different hemispheres, it appears as if there are 2 different poles of consciousness. It appears, but it's not actually the case. So I'm actually interested in that. I'm actually like reading some stuff separately on that specific issue. So this is a good one. I was actually looking for if there's some Bhagavatam way to look at it, and so that's very interesting. Thank you for that. It's a good topic.
Karthik,
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Kailash. Prabhu, I have a question about the subtle body. So where does the subtle body figure in all this? Because I understand that the subtle body comprises of, other than the mind, intelligence, and false ego, there are the subtle senses as well. So when you just described how the brain interprets these physical signals from the organs, but where does the subtle body figure in that process?
Actually, this is actually the chitta. Actually, this is chitta should be the right word. So chitta includes mind, intelligence, and false ego as part of that user interface part. That's actually like chitta. That's actually chitta. But mind is something that's commonly known to all. So use the word mind. But that's in essence. Thank you, Prabhu. That's actually chitta that includes like intelligence and false ego. That's all part of like that part. That actually that's that user interface part. And the senses, so there is a medical phenomenon of the subtle senses, like it's called phantom limb. Is that what you're talking about, Prabhu? The phantom limb problem, where they say like even if you lose your hand, you think that your hand exists or something.
No. I just purely from the shastric point of view, that there apart from the physical senses, there are subtle senses, right?
Yes, that's all in the mind. Yes, that's all in the mind. That's
okay.
Anything that's subtle, actually, the chitta is chitta, or like it's called actually like chitta, and that's where the chidabhasa happens. So Sridhar Maharaj actually calls it chidabhasa. It's called like that. It's called hazy consciousness. So that's that in between part that's actually like holding the Atma, because the rest of it is actually dead. It's all like dead matter. This Atma is just held captive by the chidabhasa. If the Atma gets relieved from the chidabhasa, that's it, he's done, actually. Like he just liberation, there's nothing left for him. he has a choice to go anywhere in the world. That's what they do with controlling the life air and then pushing it through the head and everything. So that's just getting rid of the chidabhasa. That's the mind, which is mind, intelligence, false ego. They do all this hazy consciousness business that's going on in that at that stage. And all the senses are in there because the mind wants to enjoy. So the mind can act in a number of different ways because its source is the most, that's what actually like binds us to the material world. This chidabhasa stage of hazy consciousness is what actually binds us, and not the brain or the senses or anything else. So this is like the key, that's the core portion of what's tethering us to the material world. So this is all like from Sridhar Swami's book. So
I just want to add something what Krupana has told, that brain, mind, Krupana senior Krupana Kailash, the mind
Yes,
here,
Prabhu.
the mind actually, Bhagavatam tells, if Bhagavad Gita, if you see, mind tells mind, the mind, intelligence is subtler than mind, and false ego is subtler than intelligence, and the soul is subtler than all this. But however, Bhagavatam tells 11, I think, 5, 11, 17 of Bhagavatam says, Swayam Atma Mosham. The mind, is very powerful. Mind is a powerful tool which covers the constitutional position of the soul. That is, even the subtle senses, subtle ego, the false ego, and the intelligence. It covers constitutional. The mind is so powerful. That's why we take decisions based on the mind. So much powerful
yep.
mind. So mind, that's why you use the word mind. Mind is the main sense which controls the false ego and intelligence. Because only in case of pure devotees, it is work based on the soul. In our case, it's conditional. Mind is controlling them, false ego and their intelligence. And that's how we work. And that's why our actions are all material. It's not spiritual, 100%. Because we work mainly on the mind. And mind is Atma, it is called Swayam Atma Motion. It covers the constitution portion of the soul. And also
Yes.
it covers the constitution portion of the intelligence and false ego.
Yep.
It covers that automatically. Mind
Yep.
covers everything. And that's why
Yes.
he has put the word mind. Okay?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Is it
Actually,
okay, Karthik?
yes.
Is it okay,
Actually,
Karthik?
yes. That's exactly what I was saying. It's all together in that chitta or like chidabhasa stage. That's what Sridhar Maharaj's terminology would be, chidabhasa actually for that. But I wanted to keep it in mind so that it's common and we all can relate to it. So that's a very specific term. So.
Prabhuji, I think we have some devotees here, and we should
Yep. Stop.
pray for all the devotees who are troubled by this virus. And we had sad news for his days, Paramanand Prabhu, and some devotees from our own congregation are sick in India. So we should all pray for them, chanting 3 times Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram,
Ram Ram, Hare
Ram
Hare.
Ram, Hare Hare,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna
Hare
Krishna,
Hare,
Hare
Hare
Hare,
Ram,
Hare
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 Ram,
Ram,
Ram Ram,
Hare
Hare Hare,
Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna,
Krishna, Krishna
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare Hare, Hare
Hare
Ram,
Hare,
Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
And just I took this break in between. Discussion can continue because devotees may leave, so everybody's chanting opportunity should be taken. So that's what I requested. But we can still continue the discussion if devotees are interested, else just will try to conclude the session. Yes, Prabhuji, should we, any devotees would like to discuss further, because the topic is very live still? Okay, then. We thank His Grace Kripana Vatsala Prabhu for his such a lively discussion and session, and on Srimad Bhagavatam, such different perspective he has given to all of us. So we would like to study it more and